The Diocese of St. Augustine, Florida. The faith was planted here through the blood and sacrifice of holy martyrs. It came of age in the years after the Civil War through the leadership of dedicated bishops, and is still being written today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop Felipe de Jesús Estévez.
It is proclaiming the gospel. It is building communities of faith. It is creating bonds of love. That's what an apostle is to be.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. On the northeastern shore of Florida's Atlantic coast, amidst centuries-old historic architecture and white sandy beaches, is the city of St. Augustine.
The story of the Diocese of St. Augustine combines colonial-era foundations with 20th century growth in a story that's both sort of ancient and present day.
And this is a diocese with a great historical awareness. In many places, people want the now and the future and not the past. But this Diocese of St. Augustine has a very, very great appreciation. We are about to celebrate the 150th anniversary of its foundation.
Very often when we look at the history of this country and when the Europeans came to settle here, automatically our minds go to the Pilgrims coming over on the Mayflower and this Protestant sensibility and work ethic that is so much ingrained with the American ideal. Yet, I think sometimes we need to take a step back and recognize the fact that in actuality, when the first European explorers came to the mainland of what is now the United States, they were actually Catholics. One of the first places that the Catholics settled on the American shores was St. Augustine, which is now in Florida. The Spanish explorer Don Pedro Menendez is sailing to the New World from Spain. They spot land in 1565 on August 28th, which happens to be the feast of St. Augustine of Hippo. In St. Augustine's honor, they found and named this area that they've seen as St. Augustine, Florida. They land on September 8th in 1565, and the first thing that they do when they arrive at shore is they celebrate Mass.
The first Mass was celebrated in the First Coast. From that day on, there have been other Masses celebrated in other places by other missionaries, but that Mass has not stopped. From that day, it has been continuous throughout the centuries without stopping. The beginnings were very rough. The missionaries have an incredible story of courage and heroism.
Many of the native Catholics in the region embrace Catholicism. In fact, there's a missionary priest, Father Francisco Paella, writes a letter back home in 1616. And he says that many of the native people here have received communion with such devotion that there are tears in their eyes. Many of the other tribes in the area start to look upon the Spanish and the native converts with suspicion. So in the 16th and 17th centuries, you have over 50 martyrdom events in Florida. It's called the Florida Martyrs. In the last few decades, there is a Catholic cause for canonization that has been underway for these Florida martyrs, many of whom resided right in St. Augustine.
What these missionaries did in the 1500s and the 1600s is truly amazing. I mean, we are at the present moment recovering the lives of those martyrs, of those people who died because of their faith. in protecting the Blessed Sacrament and the faith and the churches.
The Catholic Church in Florida struggled for many years because it sat at the crossroad of empires. And the territory shifted control from Spanish to French to English rule. And with all of those shifts, the Catholic population struggled to adjust to the new political realities in which it found itself. At times, there was even a question of whether the Catholic community would even survive. During the 1780s and 1790s, English incursions into Florida almost wiped out the Spanish colony, and many Spanish Catholics fled back to Cuba as a haven. After American independence and the incorporation of Florida into the United States, the Catholic Church in the Diocese of St. Augustine had a chance to regrow, and new effort was put into rebuilding the church's structures and parish networks that had almost disappeared in the preceding decades.
Catholicism in St. Augustine came of age when it was officially established as a diocese in March 1870. Bishop Augustine Varro, who had previously served as the bishop of the Diocese of Savannah, was named the first bishop.
He comes from France. In the 1830s, he comes to Baltimore in order to serve in the American missions, and he's a brilliant academic. He taught science, philosophy, and theology at St. Mary's College and Seminary until he is nominated to become the Vicar Apostolic of Florida on December 11, 1857. Now, one of the controversial things about Varro is he was a deep and profound defender of Southern rights during the Civil War, and he was a defender of slavery. So we look back on him today and are rightfully critical. But he has another position where, in a document where he defends Southern rights, he then goes on to critique the slave trade and talks about the defense of freed slaves. So he's sort of a complicated figure. After the Civil War, issues a pastoral letter calling on the Catholics to end all prejudice, and then he brings in sisters from France to specifically help with the freed slaves.
The Civil War, which is perhaps the greatest tragedy of our country, had just completed. So the South was in a great dismay because of the effects of the war. It was brother against brother. I mean, it is awful that that happened, that we were not peacemakers then. And so Bishop Verot, in a very adverse environment, brought the Sisters of St. Joseph to educate the Black coming out of slavery.
The Sisters of St. Joseph came to Florida to establish schools. As the community grew, they turned their attention to hospitals and orphanages and other charitable works. Even though they were a small community, they quickly built up and established presence in Florida. Like Catholics in other regions of the American South, negotiating the color line was difficult at times. And we see this in 1916, when 3 Sisters of St. Joseph were arrested for violating a state law that stated that white teachers could not teach in a Black school. And for a community that was trying to reach out to the Black population, their schools became de facto Black schools. It's a history of kind of a colonial presence that then goes fast forward to the 20th century and the development of Florida as a winter resort community for Northerners as the region developed, kind of then the 20th century story of Sunbelt development. And so the story of the Diocese of St. Augustine is really kind of bookended by a colonial era story and a 20th century story.
Each bishop have done an immense contribution to the state of Florida in education, care for the sick, hospital works, the understanding of people, the peacemaking, all the works of mercy to prisoners, a magnificent work which I am so proud of.
Throughout its long and rich history, The spiritual home for St. Augustine's Catholics is the parish of St. Augustine.
The cathedral basilica was constructed during the 1790s and incorporates a blend of Spanish colonial architecture with neoclassical elements that says something about the blending of Spanish and American features. But the worshiping community dates all the way back to the city's founding in 1565. So we have over 450 years of Catholic presence and Catholic worship there on the coast of Florida. What had once been the edge of empire is now a flourishing diocese with a remarkably rich history.
The architecture of St. Augustine Cathedral is a tribute to its storied past. As you approach the church, you see the typical rounded facade and bell tower of a Spanish colonial mission. The images on the walls of the Cathedral of St. Augustine illustrate the history of Spanish settlers in that area. The most important image is the depiction of the very first Mass on American soil.
One of the unique features about the cathedral that one will notice when you walk in are these richly decorated crossbeams that at the center of each one bears the coat of arms in sequence of the bishops of St. Augustine. And the present bishop's coat of arms is located above the cathedral in the sanctuary. The cathedral itself is held up by a very unique architectural element. Juquina is this natural stone that's made from a number of seashells that would be broken up and broken down and smashed into small pieces over time. And then if you look closely at the walls, you can actually see little bits of shell or natural elements from the sea that are embedded into the structure that really solidify and hold it up. So I think not only having the Spanish element to it, but also sort of bringing in the natural beauty of the Florida coastline as well.
It is a great honor to celebrate the Mass at the cathedral or the sacraments, or especially this cathedral is extremely special. The life of Augustine surrounds us all by the windows. And any look at any window tells us something about Augustine in a particular section of his life. I must say that my eyes see Our Lady of La Leche. That is a very comforting presence, the Eucharistic woman, as John Paul II would call her. To have her gaze of love, maternal gaze, as I celebrate Mass, is a very comforting presence.
Pope Paul VI raised the Cathedral of St. Augustine to the level of a minor basilica, and we know that because as we enter the church, we can see in the sanctuary a small red and yellow silk umbrella and a bell. These are emblems of that dignity and honor that's been bestowed upon the church as a minor basilica by the Pope. Parishioners of St. Augustine Cathedral to this day consider themselves members of America's first parish.
Many tourists and pilgrims come to visit the basilica on a daily basis. I think because of not just the architectural and artistic beauty of it, but when you enter this sanctuary, the faithful are able to get a sense of the outward beauty of what it means to have a relationship with God, what it means to have a relationship with the divine, and perhaps even deepen your faith in the divine. Very often as tourists, we come and we look and we take pictures, but then maybe that pilgrim moment enters into our hearts and we sit and we can make that connection between the outward signs of our spirituality and the interior reasons as to why we do have a relationship with God.
The cathedra, or chair, inside the Cathedral of St. Augustine represents Bishop Felipe Estevez's role as the chief shepherd and apostle of St. Augustine.
I was born in Cuba in 1946, and Cuba is very close to the United States. As you know, it's 90 miles south of Key West. in Key West, at night you see the lights of Havana. I was an active Catholic, even from my youth. My father had a small business in Cuba, and my father was a phenomenal cook. I miss his meals very much. My mother was a housewife, so friendly, so sensitive. Her name was Star, Estrella, and she shined the light of Christ. I have a brother and a sister. I am grateful to Monsignor Brian Walsh, head of Catholic Charities in Miami, for spearheading this program for more than 14,000 kids. In the context of the Cold War, the parents wanted to protect their children. And the visas were somehow, in a very secret way, made available to the parents. We were told that we were coming for a summer experience with the hope of returning back to Cuba, as we were thinking that the revolution would be short range. But history has its own reality, and we never returned to Cuba as such until now. Yeah, and so my parents also got a visa, and a year after, we were reunited in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the whole family. I was 15 years old then, and they didn't know a word of English, not even yes. I would say yes. It was more like an adventure, and going to the United States and learning English and a new culture. All of that was very exciting. In high school, I was close to the chaplains. I began in dialogue with them to say what was going on in my heart. At that moment, in the early 60s, I thought that I would return to Cuba. This is the country I want to live while the situation in my country reaches stability. And I contacted the Bishop of Matanzas, my own country, with the hope that I would return as a missionary. That's how it began, studying for the Diocese of Matanzas, even though I was outside already. I was ordained in Fort Wayne for the Diocese of Matanzas, Cuba, and the bishop said, go to Latin America for a while to see if we could obtain a visa so that you could enter from a Latin country. And so I went to Honduras. I had a licentiate in theology from the University of Montreal, Pontifical Faculty of Theology. And they immediately were in need of seminary professors. And so after a while in a parish, I was asked to teach at the seminary college in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Those were very difficult years in Central America, especially in Guatemala, where there were killings of even Catholic nuns. The social doctrine of the church, the prophetic teaching of the church was uncomfortable to the leading classes, and particularly the army. And so there was a lot of tension, church and state. And so there were difficult times, but the church, led by the Holy Spirit, had a wisdom of being both prophetic in its teaching, but being also respectful to the law as citizen. And we tried to survive in this very difficult social context. As time went on, I realized that the Cuban option, not possible. This was before the visit of John Paul II to Cuba in 1979. One of the fruits of his visit was an opening, at least for priests and nuns and lay workers to come to aid the church. But those were years before that. And so the discernment in my heart was to come to Miami and serve the people in South Florida who were in such need of bilingual priests, who could serve the Spanish population and at the same time would be able to speak English.
After years of ministry in South Florida, Felipe Estevez was made an auxiliary bishop of Miami. In 2011, Pope Benedict XVI named Estevez the 10th bishop of St. Augustine, Florida.
I was giving a retreat in Minnesota, and I got a call from the nuncio at noon, and the nuncio said that Pope Benedict XVI had appointed me Bishop of St. Augustine, and that filled my joy. First, because I would remain in Florida. I am very glad to be a bishop of the state of Florida, of the Conference of Florida Bishops. I like Florida a lot, and I like the church in Florida, what we do, and we work very collaboratively. That time I was not supposed to say it to anybody till a given date, so I had to keep it in secret. And immediately after that call, I had a Mass. And it was a very difficult Mass to celebrate because my emotions were all, as St. Therese says, the emotions are at times uncontrollable. And it was very difficult for me to focus on the prayers and the readings when I would say, wow, now I am going to St. Augustine, a place that I already loved. Being a bishop, having the authority, the last word, might be intimidating. I had a sort of a closeness to my priests and a desire to be what Vatican II says, to be a father, a brother, a friend. But I know that that dynamic is difficult because you are both the boss and a friend and a priest and a shepherd. How to integrate all those different roles or dimensions of perspective into one situation is a challenge. Several of the priests of St. Augustine Diocese had been my students when I was rector, and that helped because we had already a connection. I have been a bishop for 9 years already of this diocese, and I enjoy being with the priests, the elders, the young, with diversity of a presbyterate. To be an apostle to me is like being like St. Paul. I read the 2 Corinthians of St. Paul and I see myself fully there. It is proclaiming the gospel. It is building communities of faith. It is creating bonds of love. You just read the end of every epistle of St. Paul and you will see his connectivity. He's working with Timothy, Saul, Titus, Silas. He's working with others in communion, in unity. And he has that zeal, let Jesus Christ be known, let Jesus Christ be served, let Jesus Christ be loved. It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That's what an apostle is to be.